This is session 9 and we're dealing with the topic of tithing. I am the author of Tithing, Reviewing Scripture in Context. Now in our last session we dealt with the book of Malachi and specifically how the priests were behaving, in that they were giving lax worship, they were offering blind and diseased animals. God said in chapters 1 and 2 effectively that he was fed up of it, so that they might as well even shut the temple doors, because he just completely and utterly had enough. And then moving on to chapter 3, and of course the favourite verses in chapter 3, starting with verse 8, where it speaks about robbing God of the tithe. Now in the last session we discovered that the tithe was indeed food sources, and we also discovered in the last session as well that it was the priests who were indeed robbing God of the tithe. Now, the context of the book of Malachi is of course very, very important. Now, this is during the time of Ezra the scribe, Haggai and Zechariah. So what is actually happening, and how is the book actually put in context? So the book of Malachi is put into context specifically by the historical book of Nehemiah. Now the specific context of the most famous verses in Malachi about robbing God therefore comes into play when we specifically realise how the priests are actually behaving. This is likely to be the true and actual context of the verses in relation to robbing God. So the priests were entitled to 10% of the 10% of the tithe. In other words, 1% of 100. Okay, so the Levites were being effectively robbed of their portion by the priests. So the priests were robbing the Levites of the Levitical portion of the tithe. So as a result, the temple had to be shut down as the Levites decided to go to the fields to work them in order to feed themselves, neglecting their part-time temple shifts. In other words, without the Levites there, the temple couldn't run, and the Levites couldn't stay there because the Levitical portion of the tithe had been stolen by the priests. So the high priest Eliashib and Tobiah the Ammonite, related to Eliashib by marriage, were certainly not acting in favour to the people of Israel. We've got to remember that the book of Nehemiah is all about rebuilding the temple walls. And Nehemiah consistently, when he's trying to rebuild the temple walls, also comes against heavy opposition. And this was one of them. Tobiah was in direct opposition to Nehemiah's restoration and rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, and gained favour with Eliashib the high priest, who leased the storerooms of the temple to him, thus allowing him to flourish bountifully in business. So what we've got here is we have the storerooms of the temple, which are therefore being leased to Tobiah the Ammonite directly from the high priest Eliashib. So the high priest Eliashib is earning a ridiculous amount of money on the sides by renting out these storage facilities. And storage facilities in those days, specifically food, could be massive. If we think of the storage facilities that Joseph built as the second in command in Egypt during that time, you could store enough food there for years and years and years of famine. But in the case of the temple, it was these temple store areas that were being filled with food, allowing both the high priest Eliashib and Tobiah the Ammonite to flourish in business. And if you check up Tobiah the Ammonite in history, you will see that he was not just a very wealthy man, he was a very well-known man, and he was a very established individual in the kingdom at the time. So these storerooms were of course for the tithes. Nehemiah gained permission from Artaxerxes of Persia to return to the newly constructed temple in Jerusalem and restore the correct order. And not just that, furthermore, returning the storehouse to its proper and holy use. Now this required the necessary ritualized cleansing to allow this to actually take place, and the ejecting of Tobiah the Ammonite from the area, and this is all explained to us in Nehemiah 13:4-12. So effectively, Nehemiah comes back, he restores order, and he has the whole of the temple area effectively restored properly to the temple use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the actual extract from Nehemiah 13:4-12 to verify what I've actually been telling you. So Nehemiah 13, starting from verse 4, and before this Eliashib the priest, having the oversight of the chamber of the house of our God, was allied unto Tobiah, and he prepared for him a great chamber, where aforetime they laid the meat offerings, the frankincense, and the vessels, and the tithes of corn, the new wine, and the oil, which was commanded to be given to the Levites and the singers and porters, and the offerings of the priests. But in all this time was not one at Jerusalem, for in 32 year of Artaxerxes king of Babylon came I unto the king, and after certain days obtained I leave of the king. And I came to Jerusalem and understood of the evil that Eliashib did for Tobiah in preparing him a chamber in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore, therefore I cast forth all the household stuff to Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God with the meat offering and the frankincense. And I perceived that the portions of the Levites had not been given them, for the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field. Then contended I with the rulers and said, Why is this house of God forsaken? And I gathered them together, and I set them in their place. Then brought all of Judah the tithe of the corn and of the new wine and the oil unto the treasuries. So that takes us to Nehemiah 13:12. Now, with this knowledge, we can apply the context to what God is communicating in Malachi, that priests were indeed robbing God of tithing offerings and stealing the portion that was due the Levites. In other words, the Levites had nothing to eat. This is effectively why they had to escape. So this verse isn't about the New Testament church leadership. It's not for the New Testament leadership to exploit a congregation into paying tithes. It has absolutely nothing to do with a New Testament congregation. And what New Testament ministers will effectively do is they will promise them untold open heaven riches if they obey, and a curse if they do not. The whole irony of the situation is it's a rebuke of the very leadership who are selfishly withholding food from the poor. Now, already Malachi chapter 1 leading into chapter 2, which I explained in our previous session, God is setting the record straight concerning his feelings relating to the behaviour of the priests. In other words, the priests were behaving very, very badly. Now, in this situation, of course, we then need to look at the context Nehemiah is giving us for the book of Malachi. And the important question to ask here is, as it's not even the people of Israel who are being rebuked, at what point is this, or does any of this have anything to do with a New Testament congregation? My name is Carsten Villa. I'm author of Tithing, Reviewing Scripture in Context. Please like, share, comment, and you can also follow or purchase the book following the link in the description. It is available in Kindle, and it is also available in paperback. And I look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you very much.